Now, I used to look in on Mr. Holmes to keep him in touch with what was going on at police headquarters. On this occasion, I told him of a strange person who obviously had such a hatred of Napoleon I that he would break any image of him that he could find. Mr. Holmes wasn't really interested until I said that the man committed burglary in order to break images. And, well, then he wanted to know more details. Well, strange enough, all the smashed busts of Napoleon had been made in the same mould. Then murder raised its ugly head. And I asked Mr. Holmes to come to an address in Kensington, the home of a journalist. Apparently this person had purchased a bust of Napoleon, and in the early hours of one night discovered that it had disappeared from his mantelpiece. Opening his front door, he nearly fell over a dead body lying there with a great gash in its throat. The bust was found, broken into fragments, a few hundred yards away. A photograph found on the body was that of an Italian, and a friend of mine, Inspector Hill, knew him as one of the greatest cutthroats in London, and who certainly had connections with the mafia. He had once been a skillful sculptor, but had taken to evil ways. He could speak English perfectly well, but his reasons for destroying the busts were still unknown, and he refused to answer any questions on the subject. Well, we were able to trace many of the customers who had purchased the busts, and most of them were discovered broken. Mr. Holmes was then able to contact a Mr. Sandiford of Reading, offering him £10 for the purchase of the bust he owned. Intrigued, for he had only paid 15 shillings for it, Mr. Sandiford brought it to London, and in front of us all, Sherlock Holmes deliberately smashed it. What it contained solved the mystery of the adventures of the 6 Napoleons.
It was no very unusual thing for Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard to look in upon us of an evening, and his visits were welcome to Sherlock Holmes, for they enabled him to keep in touch with all that was going on at the police headquarters. In return for the news which Lestrade would bring, Holmes was always ready to listen with attention to the details of any case upon which the detective was engaged, and was able occasionally, without any active interference, to give some hint or suggestion drawn from his own vast knowledge and experience. On this particular evening, Lestrade had spoken of the weather and the newspapers. Then he had fallen silent, puffing thoughtfully at his cigar. Holmes looked keenly at him.
Anything remarkable on hand?
Oh, no, Mr. Holmes, nothing very particular.
Then tell me about it.
Well, Mr. Holmes, there's no denying that there is something on my mind. And, well, yet it is such an absurd business that I hesitated to bother you about it. On the other hand, although it is trivial, it is undoubtedly queer. And I knew that you have a taste for all that is, well, something out of the common. But to my opinion, it comes more to Dr. Watson's line than yours.
Disease?
Madness, anyhow. And a queer madness, too. You wouldn't think there was anyone living who had such a hatred of Napoleon I that he would break any image of him that he could see, eh?
That's no business of mine.
Exactly, yes, exactly. That's what I said. But then, when the man commits burglary in order to break images that are not his own, that brings it away from the doctor and on to the policeman.
Burglary? This is much more interesting. Let me hear the details.
Oh yes, the first case was reported some 4 days ago. It was at the shop of Morse Hudson, who had a place for the sale of pictures and statues in the Kensington Road. The assistant had left the front shop for an instant when he heard a crash, and hurrying in, he found a plaster bust of Napoleon, which stood with several other works of art upon the counter, lying shivered into fragments. He rushed out into the road, but Although several passers-by declared that they had noticed a man run out of the shop, he could neither see anyone or couldn't find any means of identifying the rascal. Now, it seemed to be one of those senseless acts of hooliganism which occur from time to time, and it was reported to the constable on the beat as such. The plaster cast was not worth more than a few shillings, and the whole affair appeared to be, well, too childish for any particular investigation. The second case, however, was more serious, and also more singular. It occurred only last night.